I'm Paul. As I said, I'm going to spend the first minute just introducing myself and think on, because you've probably never heard of us and what we do. And we're probably slightly just outside the normal sort of left to centre of what you might normally have here. So let me explain who I am. I'm kind of a techie. I say kind of a techie because it's been a long time. If I work with techies, they kind of go, "You're not a techie anymore." And when I work with business people, they go, "You're a techie." But I spent 3 decades in technology. I started rolling out massive computer systems, and then I started selling technology. Now I spend most of my time designing technology. I've also done digital marketing at various points, working across different sectors, including spending a very large period of time in the gaming, gambling sector. And as a hobby, I then spent 10 years in broadcast media as well, just to keep myself interested. And the thing I've realised, looking back, is that it's always been about change. It's always been about behaviour. Technology is about adoption and behaviour and all those kind of things. So about 6 years ago, I decided I wanted to leave the world of gambling. This is my geeky joke, one geeky joke. I left the dark side and I joined the light side and went to work for a company that was doing something a little bit more positive in the world of influencing behaviours. So I joined Think On. Who are we? We're a business consultancy, traditionally. Work with companies around the world. We work in most sectors. We've done quite a lot of work in healthcare. We do a lot of work in pharma at the moment. We're just starting some work in a couple of large hospitals. We tend to work with the practitioners, not the patients. And we do 2 things, really. We help people get out of their own way, what we call accelerating results, and we help them create sustainable change. So when change is happening, when change programs are going on, lots of things go on in people's heads, and we help them unpick that and manage it. We're taking some very complex subjects and we're really processizing them and simplifying them and allowing people to apply them. The core of that is that in most organizations, results are expected and actions are imposed. And when things go wrong, they bring people in to give them different actions. And without changing the thinking that precedes those actions, you end up in what Einstein called an insanity loop. You just can end up going round and round in circles. So we work predominantly in this thinking space. My role was very simply to go, traditionally when I first met the business, they did everything face-to-face. They did workshops, consultancy, coaching. And they said, we can't scale. We can't get to enough people in the organizations that want us to work with. We have to move the whole thing to digital. So that's where I came in. And I've spent the last 5 years looking at how we do that, building a series of different tools and technologies that we deploy with our clients to help them do behavioural change. And what I wanted to share with you today are 5 things I have discovered the hard way. 5 massive mistakes that I can tell you about, but probably won't stop you making anyway. Mainly because I still make them and I know what they are. So, 5 things I've learned. You need to think about the whole environment. What do I mean by that? Well, very simply, it's really easy to get focused on the change you want. To go, actually, we want to develop this particular behavioural pattern or people to do this thing at this time. But you actually have to understand, and I've nicked this model from the world of learning, and what you'll find is I take models from other sort of universities and go, this actually applies here too. So this is from the world of learning, and this is our version of it. So this is based on a model from a guy called Charles Jennings about where people learn, called 70-20-10. It's very prevalent in the sort of business learning at the moment. But what Jennings said is that if you think about everything you ever know, most of it actually doesn't come from learning. It doesn't come from anything formalized. It comes from doing the job. A small proportion of it comes from the people around you, mentors, managers, peers, and a very small amount of it comes from formalized learning. And so actually when we're now constructing any change or any intervention, one of the questions we ask ourselves is, have we covered the knowledge? If we're asking you to do something, do you know how to do it? Have we covered the context? Do you know why you're doing it? And do you care? Because if you don't, you're probably not going to. And have we got the application right? And by that, very often, we mean the application environment. Let me give you a little story that I tell managers quite a lot in organizations, because they're very bad at the bottom bit, which is, imagine if you spent a lot of money on the best piano lessons you could have, and you got the knowledge. Imagine if somebody said, you go to the music shop and you can have all the music, pick whatever you like, your favourite music. And then when you go, they go, oh no, we keep the piano locked away, you can only play when we feel like it. That's what most of our clients end up doing, and that's a real mistake in behavioural change. So we go, have you covered all three? And that's not easy, by the way. I'm not sure that always works, but it's just an interesting question to ask, because quite a lot, when you look back at why the change or the thing you were trying to do with the technology didn't work, one of those is missing. I'm covering these at a really shallow level, by the way, because I know I've only got 20 minutes, so I'm quite happy to pick up and talk about them in much more depth, either in questions or in the break. This is the one that surprises most people, which is when you get into this idea of trying to help or influence somebody else's behaviour, you already know too much. You cannot think about it from the point of view of the end user. You're too invested in it. You're too invested in the understanding, the outcomes, and that creates some real challenges. So you can't see it through the lens of the end user. One of the things that always just amazed me, we used to go, that's okay, because every time somebody joins our business, they'll be new. They'll see it like an outside person would see it. They're not steeped in our language and our outcomes and what we want to do. On average, they lose that ability within 3 months. Within 3 months, they're invested in our outcomes. They're telling us what they think we want to hear, not what they're really seeing. And the only answer is you've got to test. You've got to test, test, test. You've got to keep testing. And when you think you've tested enough, you're probably just starting to get your head around it. And if you take one thing from me in this, if you're involved in doing this, please understand, the term cognitive dissonance, if you know what it is you will create the story that will allow you to fool yourself. We are incredibly good at it. You will start explaining why you did what you did, why that was the right answer, and that gets in the way from seeing what's really going on most of the time. So, and I talk to people about all the time, and they go, yeah, but we won't do that. No, really, you do. Even if you know you're going to do it, you will do it. One of the things we do now, and I've nicked this from the world of sales, actually, is the idea, I don't know if anyone's come across blue team, red team. So if we're doing anything new, we take a portion of our staff and we don't let them see it. We go, you're in the blue team. You're not allowed in the room. You're not allowed in the conversations. Red team guys, you don't talk to them about it. So when we've got an understanding of what we want to do, we can go to them, and the first time they see it, we're presenting it as kind of a finished item. It's amazing how many times they'll sit there and go, yeah, but, and then we really see what we've designed. Progress, not perfection. This is one I guess probably one I make a lot as well, which is I get excited. We're on a project and we can do something, and I'm going, but we could do this, and we could do this, and we could do this, and this bit over here, and we just tweak this bit over here, and suddenly we're building a monster. And actually what you really need to do is go, how can you get out there? How can you get out as quickly as possible? And one of the things to be wary when you're going out there is a thing called a vocal minority. And I can best explain the vocal minority from my days in radio. I worked on my radio station, actually one in Coventry, for a number of years, and it only played very, very poppy, very loud dance music. And once a week, someone would phone up and ask for something like Van Halen. And then they would tell you why you're wrong for not playing it. And they're the only people who told you anything. So if you just listen to them, after a while, you start going, well, maybe we should be playing Van Halen. Maybe we've got the whole thing wrong. And you forget that actually most people are quite happy, and they carry on listening, and they carry on interacting. They're not telling you anything because you're doing it okay. The model I come back to a lot here is this one, which is from a book called Crossing the Chasm by Geoffrey Moore. It's used a lot by technologists. It's been around probably 30 or 40 years now, I guess. It's his version of the adoption curve for product. And I guess my lesson here is, when you start rolling something out, you're not going to get everybody to like it. You're not going to get everybody on board. Some people still don't like smartphones. Nothing you can do about it. What you need to do is find these people at this side of the curve, because they will give you the best insight and feedback, and understand when people are giving you feedback, where they are in that curve, and therefore where you should treat that feedback. I'm not saying ignore it, but understand it for what it is. People often come back and go, we wouldn't use this, and actually they're not saying we wouldn't use this, they're saying I don't use this. Think smaller. It's really easy to make these things huge, really easy to make these things huge. And I guess there's two things that I've learned with this. One, I don't know if you've come across this idea of MVP, of scaling things back down to the smallest possible point when you get a new idea. I love the Dropbox story. Has everybody used Dropbox? I don't know if you know, when Dropbox were looking for their investors, he couldn't build it, so he built a video instead. And he showed them the video. This is how it works. And that's what they brought into. That's the smallest MVP I've ever seen. So start with something tiny. And then the marginal gain stuff. So, there's loads of material about what the Team Sky and the British cycling team have done with marginal gains. But it really does work. And you break down the change and the process of change into the smallest number of components that you can, so that you can iterate each one separately and work out what works for you and the people that you're working with. Last up, stickiness. Now, unlike the last speaker, I have the unfortunate bit of working with people who don't want it most of the time. So most of our users are going, we'd rather you didn't do the change, we'd rather you went away. But that's not the case. The change is going to happen, and we have to help embed that and help people deal with it. So we're looking to build in stickiness. The first question you have to ask yourself here is, are you trying to actually create a new behavior, or are you just trying to do a nudge? Because you're going to go in completely different directions depending on how you do that. But assuming you're trying to go for a new behavior, 3 things to think about, and again, very much light touch. Number 1, have you guys come across the habit loop? Brilliantly explained in Charles Duhigg's book, The Power of Habits. But the idea that every habit that we have is built on this little cycle, that we have a cue, something happens that causes that habit to trigger, we have a routine that follows that, and then from that routine we get a reward. So one of the classic examples here is the afternoon break. The cue is, it's mid-afternoon and I yawn, I'm a bit tired, I need to stretch. The routine is I go and get a coffee, and the reward is I end up buying cookies. The thing, when you understand this, is that actually changing all of that is incredibly difficult. So we now focus on where can we make an intervention. So I would go, changing a cue, really quite tough. But if you can find a routine and attach it to an existing cue, you stand a much better advantage. So if you can find things people are doing anyway and using that trigger to cause them to do something else instead. A classic example I hear a lot in the weight loss industry is people talk about actually packing your gym bag the night before. So the cue is getting in the car and going to work, or leaving work, and actually tying a new routine to that. The second one I want you to think about, I was looking at some stuff about a year ago and working with a learning expert, and he said, most people don't actually learn anything other than by reflection. So we now think about, how do we build reflection in at the point of the process? How do we get people to think about it? And I want you to think about these 3 things. This is my cut down interpretation of somebody else's bigger model, but it does follow. Everything you've ever learned has been caused by a reflection, where you've either been caused to think about it consciously or subconsciously. Better than that, you've been caused to talk about it, and that might just be with somebody else, that might be with a colleague. Ideally, it's with somebody who knows more than you, because then they're going to ask you better questions and force you to reflect a little bit better. And the highest level of reflection is explaining something. You may have heard the adage about you never understand something until you try and teach it. It's not teaching that's the reflective activity, it's actually lesson planning, because you're changing the relationship with the material. So can you build that in to the behavioural change you're looking for? Can you cause somebody to go and explain it to somebody else? Makes it stickier. And last up, repetition. Now, I've had all sorts of stats on repetition. I've read things that say you need to get people to repeat it 4 times, things that say you need to get people to repeat it 13 times. I read a summary, a sort of newspaper article of a study that was done at the University of London last week or the week before. Not I read it last week or the week before, not the study was on last week or the week before. And they were talking about 60-something days for a habit to form. It wasn't the average number of days that absolutely freaked me out, it was the range. Because when you looked at the range in their study, it went from sort of 30 days to about a year. So you have to build in repetition, and the key here, and we've learnt this the hard way, is you have to handle breaks. So we're in a corporate environment very often, and quite a lot of what we do can easily be killed off by an annual holiday or 2 weeks off sick, because we haven't worked out how the habit picks up again at the end. So I know I have to leave a few minutes for questions, so I thought I'd start with the first question, if you don't mind, which is, you probably know more than me. What have I missed? What can I learn right now that's going to help me do this tomorrow? Because I spent 5 years doing this. I'm very excited about it, I'm very passionate about it, but I know it's not easy.